And this uncertainty is compounded too, at the time, by the fast pace of scientific change and expertise surrounding knowledge in relation to HIV. And some went even further and saw HIV as, if you like, a shock to the security of the scientific system or the expert system. And for that reason, some said that AIDS might well be described as modern, but even postmodern in its relationship to scientific medicine and institutional structures. We cannot help but wonder now what other catastrophes are waiting to pounce on us. So this is just a few words about the context being framed by uncertainty at the time. I won't spend too long on this slide, I promise, but it's just to say, at the same time, sociology was somewhat obsessed by ideas of risk and uncertainty, particularly through the work of Anthony Giddens, a UK sociologist, and Ulrich Beck, a German one who's famed, amongst other things, for writing a book called Risk Society. And his thesis was that the risk society, late modern society, is very sensitive to new risks and uncertainties produced by modernization itself, but also the fragility of science and expert systems to respond to those risks, to have a risk management solution. So modernist science, if you like, is creating risks at the same time as not having or providing solutions to dealing with them. And the classic example for Ulrich Beck in this case was the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which produced risks of unknown magnitude, which were invisible to the eye and which could not be properly risk managed by the very same scientific systems which produced those dangers. Now, HIV is not produced by modern science in the same way, but it was also taken perhaps at the time to be a symbol of risk management failure as far as medicine and science was concerned. So that's just a few words on the social context as I see it, framing this work. Anyway, our study too told of various forms of uncertainty brought about by HIV. And you can see that here in some of the extracts drawn from some of the people we interviewed. It plays on my mind all the time. This is a pervasive risk. It doesn't go away. It's constantly there. It's there, if you like, because I am. In addition, the sense of future, remember this is prior to ART being available as it is now, the future is no longer secure. It's the uncertainty, it's the not knowing what's going to happen. Not knowing if it's tomorrow. You don't know when the illness is going to strike. So this is a condition of pervasive insecurity and uncertainty. But more than that, one's sense of sexual self, relationships, and future were also depicted as very much under threat. So when you're diagnosed, you think that you're never going to have sex with anybody else again. Having the opportunity again to be in a relationship, I thought that sort of thing in my life was gone. That was all I could think of, but I had no life. So how was this overwhelming sense of insecurity about the future risk managed in our study? Well, one key narrative which comes out of the interviews, which I'm going to kind of talk about here very briefly, was the narrative of intimacy. The narrative of intimacy as a solution of uncertainty emphasized two things. First, it emphasized a new, more intimate self. The kind of sex I have now is a lot easier, more loving, for instance. I don't like the mad and bad anymore. That's the past self. It's not like me at all. I mean, the number of men I've had sex with, and now it's like because I'm in a relationship, I almost feel completely fulfilled. So the narrative of intimacy creates or portrays a new self, a new destination, the intimate self. It also emphasizes the security of relationships, of partnerships. It made me think what I really want to do with the rest of my life. And basically, all I want to be, well, is in this relationship, settle down for once, and live a reasonably stress-free life. I thought, what's going to happen in the future? I'm going to be all alone, having to cope by myself. I want someone to look after me. Now, maybe this isn't a surprise. We know, for instance, in post 9/11, that the rate of marriages went up. We probably all know somehow in our own lives that intimacy acts in some way as a solution to risk or insecurity. So maybe this is just common sense. Maybe it's an appeal to a cultural script or narrative with which we're all familiar. Here's just one account. Let's take the account of John. He's a gay man, and he's talking about his relationship with his positive partner. They're both HIV positive. And you can see here, and I think this is crucial to the argument, I almost forgot to say, that he says that love, expressed through unprotected sex, is a realization of this intimacy. It's a very potent expression of the intimacy, and that's his search for it. He says, we both knew we loved each other very much. And he said to me, you know, it's what I want to do, and I really believe that you love me very much, and you would never put us at risk from anything. I said, well, that's true, I would never. I couldn't deal with the thought of losing you. We just agreed we would do it, and it might sound crazy to an awful lot of people out there, such as health promoters, but we really believed absolutely because of how we felt about each other, just total unconditional love for each other, and that's what made it so special. But we also found this in serodiscordant relationships, in heterosexual couples, as well as same-sex couples as well, which appeal to this cultural script, this narrative of intimacy in slightly different ways. For some, for instance, it was more romanticized. It was about the giving up of myself to this bigger relationship, this future destiny defined by my relationship rather than me as an individual. Okay, I'm going to just draw us back to Ulrich Beck. This is Ulrich Beck and his partner. And it's just to remind us that in these times of uncertainty, he, as well as Giddens actually, have talked about the role of intimacy as a solution to risk. And he says, and I think it's a rather nice extract, not to over-romanticize my argument, but love is our alternative to doubt. It's the place we hope to find security. It ranks as one of the ultimate refuges, as an ultimate refuge. And he also says, and I think this speaks to the idea of socially situating risk as a rational thing to do given the circumstances. He reminds us that lovers are their own judges and choice makers for what counts as acceptable love. Now, obviously, I've just taken one of many narratives out of this study to make an argument, but I just want to kind of summarize what I think at this stage the key points are. First of all, this story tells us that risk is a product of socially situated rationality, doesn't it? That risk is relative. Risk is open to multiple interpretation. There's always multiple risks which compete for our attention. And lived risk management is an uneasy balancing act between these multiple risks which are out there. And what we see here in this study is viral safety balanced against relationship security. And we can see also that relationship security might be given greater relative priority than viral safety in this case. We can also see, second, that risk is presented as a reasoned action. You know, whatever we think about this as being slightly crazy, it's presented to us, it's narrated to us as very sensible given the circumstances. Participants defend their risk actions as justifiable given the conditions they're in. Importantly, we also see emotions in risk management. Now, we're used to, in health promotion, thinking about risk behavior as a kind of outcome of the costs and benefits of actions which are systematically calculated. We know that isn't how things work, because when we cross the road, we don't stand back and systematically, you know, maybe we do, calculate the costs and benefits of our actions. But here we see the appeal to emotions. So when risks are incalculable, other forms of rationality or knowledge are drawn upon, and here we see people drawing upon a narrative of emotion. And real-world risk decisions are often made like this. As Beck says, love is our alternative to doubt, and often there is a lot of doubt. But lastly, we see the narrative of intimacy offering not just explanation or justification for these behaviors, but I think also a way out of this situation of uncertainty in which people find themselves. What I'm arguing here is there's an additional layer of meaning to these accounts, and it's through these accounts that we can see how people are telling stories, creating narratives, also for themselves, as a way of coping with this uncertainty, as a way of, if you like, providing some kind of psychical comfort for the insecurity they're in. So I hope that makes sense. That's the first short story. And now I'd like to move on to the second one, which, as I said, is at least 10 years later, and a very different social context in relation to the availability of HIV combination treatments. You will all probably recognize this image as an image of the Vancouver artist Joe Average, which also became a symbol for the 1996 Vancouver AIDS Conference, which, was, as we know, was a landmark in terms of the global introduction and scientific support for combination HIV treatment. So the context now is somewhat different to the one I just described. And public stories around this time that we're talking about now is much more about promise, much more about aspiration and expectation, and much less about insecurity and uncertainty. This is a context then of having a sense of a productive future, one world, one hope. And I haven't got time to kind of unpack this in too much detail, but myself and my colleague in London, Sarah Bernays, who's an anthropologist, we work on this stuff together. We've argued that there's, if you like, a meta-narrative of promise and hope circulating the HIV treatment world, which is underscored by UN and international agency kind of pledges and promises and commitments, and underscored with money too. And I think, just to characterize this argument very, very quickly, this is Michal Kazachkin, who is the Chief Executive Director, or it's probably not the right title, of the Global Fund. And I think this is what I'm talking about. He says, there's hope for millions of people in the developing world affected by HIV, and it's no longer utopian, but it's evidence-based. His message at this particular conference when he was talking is one of hope, not mere optimism, but hope. So he's talking not of a generalized kind of hope, but of a concrete hope, of something real. This is not merely aspirational, at least in terms of the language which has been deployed here in relation to the hope and promise of HIV treatment. We can rise to the challenges ahead of us and finally end the AIDS epidemic. So this is a discourse of hope, very different to the context we heard about earlier. And we know that quite often in WHO and other UN and international agencies' efforts to galvanize support, to underscore the finances and other things necessary to make HIV treatment deliverable, that often there's many stories of hope which are kind of depicted and portrayed, and often through testimonials of people living with HIV. And here's just one example. Ishmael is an example of how antiretroviral medicine is giving new hope to people living with HIV. This is off the WHO website. He says, I'm a human being again. I am working, and crucially he says, I am a productive citizen. But we know, and Bill Clinton many years ago reminded us, that this is not a world of near universal access to HIV treatment, despite the pledges. This is a very unequal world of access to HIV treatment. And I want to talk about a part of the world where actually access to HIV treatment is not that insecure. So this is a story of both global promise and rationed local expectation, if you like. And we're interested in how people living with HIV navigate that disjuncture between global promises of HIV treatment and all that involves for securing a productive future, and their local micro situations of treatment insecurity. As I say, I need to credit Sarah, whose work this is, who we've been working on this together. So we were doing qualitative studies with people living with HIV between 2004 and 2007 in Serbia. Now Serbia, in national law anyway, it does have universal access to HIV treatment. Every person with HIV has access to treatment. There's no rationing as such.